Sycamore Ridge woke like a kiln, the cliffs catching first light until the canyon looked warm to the touch. Marcus Hale lay by the infinity pool, practicing the hard skill of doing nothing. Brianna read beside him. Caleb chased a foam ball. Nora wore a towel like a cape and counted dragonflies. A shadow crossed the slate. "Good morning," said a man in a charcoal blazer, resort crest bright on his pocket. "May I see your room key, sir?" Brianna closed her book. "Is there a problem?" "Routine verification," the man replied. "We've had walk-ins." Marcus handed over the key card. "Hale, Villa 12. The scanner chirped. The nod that followed felt like a comma. "I'll have my colleague confirm." He gestured to a younger guard near the cacti, buzz cut, earbud tucked like a secret. "Last weekend was rough," the younger one said. "ID, please." "You have the room key," Marcus answered, keeping his voice level. Still, he took out his wallet, a lifetime of visible hands. The guard smirked as if the plastic had answered too quickly. Nora's cape sagged. Caleb drifted closer. The first guard murmured into his mic. Across the deck, a couple lifted sunglasses. "Sir," the first guard said, voice firmer, "please remain here. We've called the sheriff." "On what basis?" Brianna asked. "Protocol," the younger one replied. "Anonymous report." "As in no name, no facts," she said. He shrugged, as if anonymity were a warrant. Sirens arrived as a tremor, then a thin whine climbing the stone. Two deputies walked in, one older, face mapped by sun, one new, stance restless. "Morning," said the older deputy. "We got a call." "From whom?" Brianna asked. "Dispatch," the younger said. "Ma'am, step back." Marcus kept his hands visible. "Marcus Hale," he said, calm like a second language. "I'm with the Federal Bureau of..." "Badge," the younger cut in. Marcus offered it. He pinched it and didn't read. "Cute." "That is a federal credential," Brianna said evenly. "You are required to verify it." "Don't tell me my job," he answered. Phones rose at chest height. The older deputy counted them, then the children, then the badge in his partner's hand. "Let's take it easy," he murmured. But the younger was already moving. "Turn around." Caleb's mouth opened and stayed that way. Nora gripped Brianna's hand. Marcus looked at the red cliffs, grand and indifferent, then turned. The cuffs kissed his wrists with practiced efficiency. A hush followed the clink of metal. Brianna stepped forward, precise and calm, unlawful detention, lack of probable cause, discriminatory enforcement. A woman recorded. A man in linen said, "This is wrong," and did not move. The older deputy stared at the phones, then at the children, then at the credential now actually read in his partner's hand. "Harris," he said quietly, "check it." Harris flushed beneath pride. He read, and something in his jaw clicked. The resort manager hurried over with apologies already crowding his mouth. "Key," the older deputy said. For a heartbeat no one moved. Then metal answered metal, and the cuffs opened like a late lesson. Phones lowered. The manager began his script: confusion, recent incidents, complimentary dinners. Brianna looked through him as if contrition were fog. Marcus rubbed his wrists, marks formed like signatures. He remembered fluorescent rooms and families he'd promised due process to. A hinge inside him creaked. The promise had not failed, it had asked for proof. Brianna lifted her chin. "We're not letting this disappear." "We won't," Marcus said. The children stood still, as if stillness could rewind time. Nora's cape hung like a question. Caleb's hand found his father's. The cliffs stared back, bright and silent. The manager talked about vouchers. The older deputy mentioned paperwork. The younger said nothing. Brianna took out her phone. "I'm calling my office," she told Marcus, "and also the deputies, and also the crowd. We will be filing." He nodded. The morning had grown edges. He felt the shape of what would come: statements, reports, careful language, a road that didn't frighten him. Not because it was easier, but because his children had seen the first mile. They stood together, 4 figures reflected in the pool's blue glass, a small island of intent in a place built to sell ease. Marcus squeezed Caleb's hand. "We're going to be okay," he said, believing it enough to say it again. "We're going to be okay." The resort's general manager, Harold Benton, ushered the Hale family into a shaded cabana, his hands fluttering like a man trying to smooth water with his palms. He had slicked back hair that shone almost too brightly under the afternoon sun, and his cologne tried too hard to mask the stench of failure. "I want to personally apologize," he said, his voice trained for hospitality, not justice. "This was a misunderstanding, a breakdown in communication. Please, allow us to make it right. A complimentary suite upgrade, spa vouchers, dinner on the house." Brianna cut in, her tone sharp but steady. "Our children watched their father handcuffed. No dinner will erase that." Marcus sat rigid, wrists still tingling from the cuffs. Caleb leaned against him, while Nora curled in her mother's lap. Their eyes were not on Benton, they were locked on their parents, searching for reassurance in the silence between words. "Mrs. Hale," Benton stammered, "we regret." "You regret exposure," Brianna corrected. "Not what was done." The older deputy, Larson, stood at the cabana entrance, hat in his hand. His partner, Harris, lingered at the edge, avoiding eye contact. The crowd outside had begun to thin, but murmurs lingered, and phones still glowed with saved videos. "Ma'am," Larson said carefully, "I'll be filing a report. Internal review will follow." Brianna studied him. His lined face suggested experience, perhaps even regret. But she knew systems, and systems preferred survival to truth. "I will file my own report," she replied. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but carrying. "Do you understand what you almost did?" His words were directed at Harris, who shifted uncomfortably. "You placed me under arrest without cause. You mocked my badge. You humiliated my children. If this is how you treat someone who carries federal credentials, how do you treat those without?" Harris's jaw tightened. "I was following protocol." "No," Marcus said. "You were following prejudice. Don't confuse the two." Benton coughed nervously, trying to redirect. "We want to ensure your comfort. Perhaps if we sit down privately." Brianna stood, setting Nora gently aside. "Comfort is not the issue. Justice is. You cannot buy silence with gift cards." She dialed her office number, the gesture deliberate. "Karen?" "Yes, it's Brianna Hale. I need a team assembled tonight. We're filing against Red Rock Resort and the Sheriff's Department. Civil rights violations. False detention. Harassment in front of minors." Marcus watched her, pride flickering behind his weariness. It reminded him of why he had fallen in love with her years ago, the fire, the refusal to bend where others would. He had spent his career facing the weight of systemic failure. She had spent hers fighting it in courtrooms. Together, they had promised to raise children who would not accept silence as safety. Larson cleared his throat. "Deputy Chief Paulson will want to speak with you." "Then he can come here," Brianna said, her voice final. As if summoned, a new figure appeared at the cabana's edge. Deputy Chief Paulson was tall, composed, his uniform pressed into sharp lines. His eyes scanned the room, lingering on the children before settling on Marcus. "I heard what happened," Paulson began. "It does not reflect our standards." Brianna laughed without humor. "It is your standard." You only regret that people filmed it. Paulson did not flinch, though his jaw set. We'll conduct an investigation. Conduct whatever you like, Marcus said. I'll be sending this to the bureau. And to the press, if I must. Paulson nodded once, acknowledging the line drawn. Then we will cooperate. Outside, the desert sun dipped lower, stretching long shadows across the resort's manicured lawns. Inside the cabana, the Hale family sat close, the air heavy but electric. Caleb whispered, "Dad, are we leaving?" Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Not yet. First, we stand. The chapter closed not with resolution, but with a choice, to resist, to fight, to make visible what others wished hidden. The children, still shaken, absorbed it all, the restraint of their father, the fury of their mother, the weight of injustice pressing against fragile childhood. The resort, designed for serenity, had become a stage for something larger. And the Hales knew the performance had only begun. By the time the Hales returned to their villa, dusk had painted the red cliffs with bruised purples. The pool shimmered in silence, but the stillness was fragile, ready to crack with the smallest touch. Marcus set his wallet and badge on the dresser, as if to remind himself, and his children, that they were real, not props to be dismissed. Brianna moved through the room briskly, calling colleagues, drafting notes, pacing with the momentum of someone who could not afford stillness. Her voice shifted between calm professionalism and flashes of fire. She documented every detail, the guard's words, Harris's mockery, the moment the cuffs closed. Each note was a stone placed carefully into a foundation she meant to build. Nora sat cross-legged on the bed, clutching her towel cape. "Mom," she whispered, "are we in trouble?" Brianna stopped pacing, crouching beside her daughter. "No, honey. They are in trouble. They broke the rules, not us." "But they put Daddy in handcuffs," Caleb said. His voice cracked, the disbelief still raw. Like he was bad. Marcus drew his son close. "Caleb, listen. Sometimes people with authority use it the wrong way. Today, they wanted to scare us. But being scared and being guilty are not the same." The boy's small shoulders trembled. Marcus tightened his embrace, feeling the fragile bones under his palms. He remembered interviews with families who had lost sons to badges and bias. He had promised them justice. Now, his own children had tasted the fear he had only described before. Outside, voices carried faintly from the courtyard. Guests whispered about the man in cuffs, about the lawyer's fury, about the videos already online. The story had escaped the cabana. Brianna joined Marcus by the bed. "The footage is circulating," she said. "By morning, this resort will be a headline." Marcus nodded, though unease shadowed his eyes. "And tomorrow, our children will wake up knowing their family is a symbol of something larger than themselves." Brianna placed a hand on his wrist, where the red marks still lingered. "Symbols matter. They change things. But they come at a cost," Marcus replied. His gaze flicked toward Caleb and Nora. The knock came late, 2 measured raps. Marcus opened the door to find Deputy Chief Paulson. He carried no hat, no theatrics, only the weary gravity of a man who had weathered storms before. "I need to speak with you," Paulson said. "Privately." Brianna stepped forward instantly. "If it concerns us, it concerns both of us. We don't do secrets." Paulson inclined his head, conceding. "Then both." He entered slowly, scanning the room, lowering his voice. "You should know this won't be easy. The younger deputy, Harris, his father is on the county board. This could get political." Brianna's lips tightened. "So justice must bow to connections?" Paulson shook his head. "No. But politics will try. I want you prepared." Marcus crossed his arms. "Prepared is my default. Paulson exhaled. I'll recommend disciplinary action, but pushback will come. Harris will claim he followed protocol. The resort will argue you matched a description of trespassers. The case will twist. Brianna's eyes burned. And our children's trauma? The humiliation? The public mockery of federal credentials? You think that twists? Paulson's shoulders sagged. No. I think it's clear. But clarity doesn't guarantee justice. Not here. Silence stretched. Caleb shifted closer to Nora, both listening though neither fully understanding. Marcus finally spoke. Then we escalate. Federal channels. Civil Rights Division. National coverage if we must. Paulson met his eyes. For a brief moment, respect flickered, respect for someone unwilling to bow. Then I'll do what I can on my end, he said. He left quietly, the door closing like a soft warning. Brianna turned to Marcus. They're already planning their excuses. And we'll plan our truth, Marcus replied. Outside, the desert stars began to appear, distant, steady witnesses. Inside, the Hales sat together, the weight of the day pressing down, but their resolve rising stronger than before. The pool's reflection caught them, four figures, bruised by injustice but bound by something unbreakable. Family, fierce and unyielding. Tomorrow would bring headlines. Tonight, they had each other. Morning broke with the sharp light of the desert, spilling across the resort like truth searing a lie. The Hale family sat together at the villa's breakfast table, untouched plates of fruit and pastries before them. The television above the minibar carried the local news. An incident at Red Rock Resort has sparked outrage, the anchor intoned. Grainy cell phone footage filled the screen, Marcus turning slowly, wrists cuffed, Caleb's small voice crying, Brianna's sharp declaration of rights. The clip repeated twice, then froze on Marcus's bowed head, a still image that would travel further than any explanation. Nora hid her face against Brianna's arm. Caleb stared, unblinking. That's us, he whispered. Yes, Marcus said quietly. That's us. And now people know. The station cut to interviews with bystanders. A woman in sunglasses described the humiliation. A man in linen said, it was wrong. Everyone saw it. Their words were shaky, imperfect, but they confirmed the truth. Brianna muted the screen. The footage has already spread. National outlets are picking it up. My office is swamped with inquiries. Marcus rubbed his forehead. Then this is bigger than us now. It was always bigger, Brianna replied. Now it just has an audience. The villa phone rang. Marcus answered, his voice measured. This is Hale. A clipped voice responded, Deputy Chief Paulson. The sheriff's department is under pressure. The county board is meeting tonight. You should expect statements. Marcus listened, then hung up. They're circling wagons. Brianna leaned forward. Let them. We have leverage. Caleb pushed away his plate. I don't want to be on TV, he said, tears edging his words. Brianna knelt beside him. I know, baby. But sometimes, telling the truth means people see you. It's not fair, but it matters. The knock came just before noon, 3 firm taps. A journalist stood at the door, notepad in hand, camera crew behind her. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, can we get your statement? Brianna straightened, her lawyer's poise settling over her like armor. On the record, this was racial profiling, abuse of authority, and an assault on our family's dignity. We are pursuing legal action. Marcus added, his voice steady but resonant, and no parent should have to explain to their children why law and order means humiliation for some and protection for others. The crew captured every word, every flicker of Caleb's fear, every trace of resolve in Brianna's eyes. Later, alone, Marcus sat at the edge of the pool, staring at the water's endless ripple. He remembered past cases, families whose stories had ended in funerals instead of lawsuits. He remembered their trembling hands as they clutched photos. He remembered promising them justice, and now realized how hollow those promises might have sounded until this very moment. Brianna joined him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're carrying it all again." He shook his head. "This time it's different. It's us. And our kids are watching." "Then let them watch," she said firmly. "Let them see what resistance looks like." That night, social media blazed. Hashtags trended, hashtag justice for the Hales, hashtag cuffs at the resort, hashtag stand together. Strangers argued, supported, condemned, defended. The footage replayed endlessly, commentary piling higher by the hour. In a hotel built for luxury, the walls now carried whispers of shame. Guests eyed staff with suspicion. Staff eyed deputies with resentment. The resort was no longer a haven, it was a wound exposed to the world. The Hales tucked their children into bed, promising safety though they knew the world outside remained sharp. Brianna kissed Marcus's hand where the cuffs had left faint bruises. "Tomorrow, the real fight begins." Marcus looked at his sleeping children and whispered back, "Then we won't lose." The desert night swallowed their words, carrying them into the wide silence, where stars bore witness to a family becoming more than just victims, they were becoming a voice. The county board met in a beige chamber that smelled of old paper and polished wood. Rows of folding chairs filled with townsfolk, activists, reporters, and resort staff, all buzzing with the anticipation of spectacle. The Hales entered together, a tight line of resolve. Caleb clutched Nora's hand, their small figures dwarfed by the oak doors. Marcus wore his best suit, the same one he had used for testimonies in federal court. Brianna carried a slim leather folder stuffed with affidavits, witness accounts, and printed stills from the video now shared across the country. Her heels clicked against the tile like a steady drumbeat of defiance. At the front of the room sat the board members, 5 officials, faces carved into masks of control. Among them was Councilman Harris Sr. His resemblance to Deputy Harris impossible to miss. His eyes locked onto Marcus with a look that held neither apology nor shame, only challenge. The chairman tapped the microphone. "We are here to discuss the recent incident at Red Rock Resort and the subsequent public response." His voice droned as though he hoped monotony could smother outrage. Brianna stood before he finished. "We are not here to discuss response," she said. "We are here to address misconduct, racial profiling, unlawful detention, and the trauma inflicted on 2 children." A murmur rippled through the room. The journalists scribbled furiously. Councilman Harris Sr. leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, your husband resisted protocol. Our deputies had every right to verify identity." Marcus rose slowly, towering above the table. "Your deputy mocked federal credentials. He dismissed legal authority because it belonged to a man who looked like me. That wasn't protocol, it was prejudice dressed in uniform." Gasps and nods punctuated his words. One woman in the back clapped before being hushed. Larson, the older deputy, spoke next. "I was there. Mr. Hale cooperated. The cuffs weren't necessary." His testimony cut through the tension like a blade. Harris Sr. stiffened, but the truth hung heavy in the room. Brianna opened her folder, laying out photos of Marcus's wrists, still faintly bruised. "These are not misunderstandings. These are violations. And unless action is taken, we will pursue them in federal court." The chairman shuffled papers nervously. "We appreciate your concerns." "Concerns?" Brianna's voice rose, not in anger but in clarity. "Our children's nightmares are not concerns. They are consequences of your department's failure to uphold basic dignity." The cameras caught every syllable, every flinch of the board members. Councilman Harris Sr. attempted one last defense. This is being blown out of proportion. Social media thrives on exaggeration. Marcus turned toward the audience, his voice steady, solemn. If humiliation in front of your children is proportionate, then perhaps you have never lived on the other side of your deputy's gaze. The silence that followed was heavier than applause. Reporters leaned in, pen stilled, as if afraid to miss the weight of the moment. The chairman finally cleared his throat. An internal review will proceed. Deputy Harris has been placed on temporary leave. Further action will be determined. Brianna leaned close to Marcus as they sat down. Temporary leave, she whispered. They're testing if the storm will pass. Marcus's jaw tightened. Then we make sure it doesn't. Outside the boardroom, the crowd spilled into the evening air, buzzing with energy. Activists approached Brianna, offering support networks, legal alliances, media contacts. Strangers shook Marcus's hand, thanking him for standing firm. The children clung close, overwhelmed but aware. Nora whispered, "Mom, did we win?" Brianna knelt, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead. "Not yet, sweetheart. But we've been heard." Marcus looked out at the desert horizon, where the sun bled into the canyon's edge. "And once a truth is heard," he said softly, "it's hard to silence." The storm did not pass. By the next morning, the Hales awoke to their phones vibrating endlessly, messages pouring in from every corner of the country. News outlets demanded interviews. Advocacy groups offered solidarity. Old friends called to express outrage. Strangers wrote letters of support, while others spat venom from behind anonymous accounts. Caleb sat at the breakfast table scrolling through headlines on Brianna's tablet. "Dad, why are people fighting about us?" His small brow furrowed as he read comments he couldn't fully understand. Some praised Marcus as a hero, others branded him a liar, a troublemaker. Marcus gently took the tablet from his son. "Because the truth makes people choose sides. Some will stand with us, some will try to deny what they saw. But you need to remember, Caleb, truth doesn't stop being true because people argue about it." Brianna joined them with her laptop open, eyes sharp. National Civil Rights Alliance just reached out. They want to amplify the case. They think it could expose patterns of abuse in counties like this one. Marcus nodded, though fatigue traced his face. "Then we'll let them. But we need to keep control. This isn't about turning us into celebrities, it's about changing what happened here." Across town, Sheriff Daniels called an emergency press conference. The footage played behind him on a projector screen. His voice strained as he attempted the impossible, to acknowledge the regrettable incident while preserving the integrity of his department. "Our deputies acted in good faith," he declared, "though mistakes were made. We are committed to reviewing protocols." The reporters pounced. Was racial profiling a factor? Why dismiss a federal badge as fake? Will Deputy Harris face charges? Daniels dodged, deflected, repeated phrases polished until they lost meaning. Back at the resort, tension simmered. Some guests eyed the Hales with sympathy, offering quiet nods in the hallways. Others avoided them, muttering about drama ruining vacations. The staff moved stiffly, trapped between hospitality and fear. The infinity pool lay strangely empty, as though no one dared swim where injustice had stained the water. That evening, Deputy Chief Paulson visited again, this time without uniform. He wore plain clothes, his eyes shadowed by sleeplessness. "I wanted you to hear it from me," he told Marcus and Brianna. The department split. Some want Harris dismissed. Others are circling to protect him. His father is pushing hard. "If you pursue this federally, you'll make enemies you can't predict." Brianna's response was immediate. "We already have enemies. The difference is now they're visible." Paulson studied her, then Marcus. "You've got allies too, don't waste them. If you want real change, you'll need more than outrage. You'll need strategy. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his wrists unconsciously. Strategy's something we can build. What I want to know is whether you'll stand with us when this gets ugly. Paulson hesitated, the weight of his career pressing against his conscience. I'll stand with the truth, he said finally. That's the best I can give. After he left, the children lingered near the door. Nora asked softly, "Are we going home soon?" Brianna knelt beside her. Home isn't always safe from things like this. That's why we fight, to make sure someday it will be. The words carried into the quiet night, heavy but necessary. Outside, the desert wind moved through the canyon like a whisper of history, reminding them that injustice was not new, but neither was resistance. Inside the villa, the Hales sat together on the couch, for shadows bound by love, fear, and something fiercer than both, the will to endure. Sleep came fitfully. Caleb tossed, murmuring fragments of questions he hadn't dared ask while awake. Nora curled against Brianna, her small hand gripping her mother's sleeve as if it were an anchor. Marcus lay on the edge of the bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling fan as it turned with relentless monotony. Every time he closed his eyes, the sound of cuffs clinking replayed. He saw Harris's smirk, the disbelief in the crowd, his children's wide, terrified eyes. He remembered past investigations, cases of men who never returned home, of families who never had the chance to fight back. Those memories pressed on him now, heavier because his own family had nearly joined that history. In the next room, Brianna sat with her laptop glowing faintly in the dark. Legal documents sprawled across the screen, complaints drafted, statutes cited, witness lists forming. Her fingers paused, trembling only slightly before steadying again. She had argued cases of injustice before, but none where her children had been direct witnesses, none where her husband had been the one in cuffs. This case wasn't just professional. It was personal fire forged into legal steel. Outside the villa, silence held for hours. But sometime near midnight, voices drifted across the courtyard, low, harsh, the unmistakable timbre of argument. Marcus rose, moving silently to the window. Two deputies stood near the resort gates, one of them Harris. Even from the distance, Marcus recognized the squared shoulders, the restless pacing of a man still defiant. "Can't believe they're making me take leave," Harris muttered. His companion tried to hush him, but his voice carried. "He embarrassed me in front of everyone. Him and that lawyer wife of his. This isn't over." Marcus's jaw clenched. He stepped back, unwilling to let anger decide his movements. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't just prejudice, it was vengeance brewing. By dawn, the family gathered again at the breakfast table. Brianna's eyes were ringed with exhaustion, but her voice carried no weakness. "The lawsuit will be filed within 48 hours, she said. Civil rights violations. Emotional distress. Federal oversight petition. We'll hit them from every angle." Marcus nodded, though worry flickered in his gaze. "And Harris?" "He'll bury himself," Brianna replied. "People like him always do." Caleb stirred his cereal slowly. "What if they come back?" Marcus reached across the table, covering his son's hand. "Then we'll stand stronger than before. We're not running, Caleb. Not from them." Later that day, reporters camped outside the resort. Microphones and cameras formed a gauntlet. The Hales walked through together, ignoring shouted questions until Brianna stopped, her voice rising clear over the din. "We are not leaving quietly," she declared. "We are not accepting apologies wrapped in excuses. This is about more than our family. This is about every family who has been told their dignity is negotiable. We will not rest until accountability is more than a word." The clip hit the evening news, carried alongside footage of protests forming in front of the county courthouse. Hand-painted signs read, "Justice now." Stop the abuse. Families deserve safety. That night, as the protests grew louder outside, the Hales sat close inside their villa. The desert felt different, less silent, more alive, as though voices carried by the wind were joining theirs. Caleb leaned against his father, whispering, "I'm not scared anymore." Marcus kissed his son's forehead. "That's what courage feels like," he murmured. Not the absence of fear, but standing anyway. The long night had passed, but the real battles lay ahead. 2 days later, the town square filled like a bowl brimming with voices. Protesters lined the courthouse steps, their chants echoing off sandstone walls weathered by decades of silence. Homemade signs wavered in the dry breeze, "Justice for all families, no more profiling, accountability now." The Hales approached carefully, their children's hands held tight. Marcus wore sunglasses, not to hide but to steady himself against the flood of eyes. Brianna's stride was purposeful, her folder tucked under her arm like both weapon and shield. Reporters surged forward, but the crowd parted, cheers rising. Some reached out to touch Marcus's shoulder, others clasped Brianna's hand as if her fire lent them courage. Caleb and Nora clung closer, wide-eyed but sensing the gravity. On the courthouse steps, Brianna paused. She turned to the gathering, her voice carrying without need for microphones. "We came here as a family seeking peace, and we were met with humiliation. But today, we stand not only for ourselves, but for every voice that has been silenced, every child who has been taught fear instead of safety." The crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. For the first time, Caleb smiled faintly, realizing that his mother's words were building something bigger than fear. Inside the courthouse, the hearing was tense. Lawyers shuffled papers, board members whispered, deputies sat stiff-backed in rows. Deputy Harris himself appeared, jaw set, eyes narrowed. His father sat just behind him, hands clasped like a shield of politics. Marcus testified first. He spoke not as an FBI agent but as a father, his voice slow and deliberate. "When those cuffs closed on my wrists, I wasn't just a man in custody. I was a father stripped of dignity before his children. They saw me treated as guilty for nothing more than being present. That moment will live with them longer than any vacation memory." Brianna followed, her words cutting like polished stone. "My children now know that authority can be dangerous. That lesson is not abstract, it is bruised into their father's skin. And if this board allows such conduct to pass with excuses, then it tells every deputy they can wield prejudice without consequence." The defense tried to pivot. Harris's attorney claimed miscommunication, that Marcus had not presented sufficient identification, that the situation was tense and unclear. But the video replayed on courtroom screens, undeniable, Harris mocking the badge, the cuffs snapping closed, the children's cries. Murmurs swept through the room. Even some deputies shifted uneasily. Councilman Harris Sr. rose in defense of his son, his speech heavy with bluster. "This family seeks fame, not justice. They invite chaos, they smear good officers." Brianna stood abruptly, her voice firm. "We seek dignity. If that feels like chaos to you, perhaps you've mistaken order for oppression." The chamber went still. Cameras captured every syllable, every glance exchanged between father and son, every ripple of discomfort across the board. Outside, the chants grew louder, swelling with momentum. The courthouse windows trembled faintly with their rhythm, "Justice now. Justice now." The session adjourned with no verdict yet, only promises of further review. But the crowd outside did not disperse. They knew delay was a tactic, silence in disguise. The Hales exited through the main doors, choosing visibility over safety. The protesters cheered, lifting signs higher. Caleb and Nora squeezed their parents' hands, their small bodies buoyed by the tide of voices. For the first time since the poolside incident, Marcus felt something stronger than humiliation rise in his chest. It was not victory, not yet, but it was momentum, and it carried the weight of more than just his family. That evening, as the desert sky blazed orange and purple, the Hales sat together, tired but unbroken. Caleb whispered, "Did we win today?" Marcus answered softly, "We didn't win yet. But we made them listen." Brianna added, "And that's how every victory begins." The following week unfolded like a storm that refused to drift away. Every day brought new headlines, new commentary, and new pressure. National networks broadcast panel debates about racial bias in law enforcement. Editorials dissected the Hale case, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. At the resort, whispers grew louder. Guests canceled bookings, citing safety concerns and bad press. Staff, once trained to smile through anything, now flinched under every question. The infinity pool remained empty, a blue mirror reflecting silence instead of laughter. Inside Villa 12, the Hales tried to live normally, but normal was gone. Caleb asked if he could swim again, then shook his head before anyone answered. Nora drew pictures of handcuffs on paper and then tore them apart, her way of undoing what she couldn't forget. Marcus carried his badge differently now, always visible, never hidden. He wanted his children to see it not as a symbol mocked but as a promise kept. Still, every glance in the mirror reminded him of Harris's sneer, of the ease with which dignity had been stripped. Brianna, meanwhile, drove herself harder. Meetings with advocacy groups filled her days. Calls with civil rights lawyers consumed her evenings. She began preparing not only for their own lawsuit but for broader litigation targeting systemic abuse across the state. Her voice, once confined to courtrooms, now rang through radio interviews and podcasts. But pressure carved cracks in even the strongest stone. One evening, after another day of testimonies and interviews, Marcus found Brianna in the bathroom, gripping the sink, her reflection pale and taut. "Bree," he said softly, "you're running on fumes." She met his eyes in the mirror, a flicker of weariness breaking through the fire. "If I stop, Marcus, even for a moment, they win. They bury this under paperwork and time, and our children learn that silence is safer." He touched her shoulder gently. "Our children also need us whole. They need to see us fight, but they also need to see us heal." She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch for a rare second of surrender. I can't let this fade into another forgotten headline." The knock at the villa door shattered the fragile pause. Marcus opened it to find Deputy Larson, hat in hand, expression heavy. "Mr. Hale, Mrs. Hale, I thought you should know. Harris has been making noise. Off duty, but loud. He's saying he was set up, that you provoked him, that your wife is turning this into politics." Brianna's jaw tightened. "Let him talk. His words condemn him more than ours ever could." Larson hesitated. "Be careful. Pride makes dangerous men. And Harris isn't the type to admit fault." That night, Caleb woke screaming from a nightmare, convinced deputies were breaking down the villa door. Marcus held him until the tremors eased, whispering lullabies he barely remembered from his own childhood. Brianna sat beside them, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. The cracks in their armor were visible now, not weakness, but humanity laid bare. They were strong, yes, but strength did not erase pain. It only carried it differently. The next morning, Brianna stood before another crowd of cameras. Her voice was steady, but her eyes carried the shadows of the night. "We are not backing down," she declared. "Not because it is easy, but because our children, and yours, deserve better." The crowd roared its approval. Marcus stood beside her, hand resting lightly on her back, silently lending his weight. Caleb and Nora watched from the steps, learning that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to face it again and again. And somewhere in the courthouse, Harris clenched his fists, his bitterness fermenting into something more dangerous. The system was beginning to fracture, and everyone felt it. The courthouse hearings stretched into their second week, each session peeling back layers of hostility and denial. Every day the square outside filled with protesters carrying banners, chanting for accountability. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and persistence. Inside, the tension was sharper. Harris sat rigid at the defense table, his uniform traded for a suit that fit poorly, his posture stiff as if his pride alone held him upright. His father lingered behind him, whispering in his ear during breaks, feeding him strategy, anger, and justification. Marcus testified again, this time recounting details from his FBI career, cases where prejudice had cost lives, where silence had sealed fates. His voice carried not only as a victim but as a witness of history. The courtroom listened, some nodding, others shifting uneasily under the weight of truths too familiar. Brianna delivered arguments with surgical precision. She quoted statutes, referenced precedents, pointed to the video footage like an undeniable mirror. When bias walks in uniform, it is not just misconduct, she told the board. It is betrayal, of the law, of the badge, of the people it swore to protect. Councilman Harris Sr. snapped back, his tone dripping disdain. This family is exploiting tragedy for personal gain. They want fame, money, attention. Brianna cut him off. We want dignity. If demanding dignity threatens your comfort, perhaps you should reconsider where you sit. Gasps filled the chamber. The reporter's pen scratched furiously. Harris Sr.'s face flushed crimson, but his words faltered. The board recessed for lunch, but the Hales did not retreat to quiet. Outside, the crowd surged around them, chanting their names, thanking them for speaking. Caleb clung to Marcus's hand, Nora sat on Brianna's hip, both overwhelmed yet strangely calm within the storm. Later that evening, back at the villa, the family tried to reclaim fragments of normalcy. Marcus grilled vegetables on the patio, the smoke curling into the desert dusk. Caleb told stories about dragonflies by the pool. Nora giggled when Brianna pretended to wear the towel cape again. For a fleeting hour, laughter returned. But the peace fractured with a phone call. Paulson's voice was grim. There's been talk of retaliation. Not official, but whispers. Harris has friends in the department, and some don't like the attention you're bringing. Marcus gripped the phone tighter. Are we safe here? A pause stretched, too long. Safer than most places, Paulson said finally. But be cautious. Lines are being drawn. After the call, Marcus paced the villa. He checked locks, scanned shadows through the curtains, his instincts no longer those of a guest but of a man preparing for siege. Brianna touched his arm. We can't let fear silence us. I know, Marcus replied, staring at his badge on the table. But fear sharpens caution. And right now, caution might keep us alive. The children slept early, exhaustion pulling them under. Marcus and Brianna sat outside, the desert stars sprawling like scattered truths above them. They're choosing sides, Brianna whispered. Marcus nodded. Then so are we. The night hummed with quiet, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of threat and promise, the knowledge that the fight had moved beyond hearings and headlines. It was now a battle of willpower, and neither side intended to yield. Lines had been drawn in the sand, and the desert wind would decide which would endure. The following morning dawned brittle and tense. The resort's manicured grounds, once meant for relaxation, now felt like a fortress under siege. Guests glanced nervously at the protesters beyond the gates. Staff whispered in corners, unsure whether to greet the Hales with warmth or distance. The infinity pool sparkled, but no one dared swim. Inside Villa 12, Marcus laced his shoes with deliberate slowness. His hands trembled, though not from fear alone, it was the tremor of vigilance, the anticipation of conflict. Brianna adjusted her blazer in the mirror, masking fatigue with discipline. Caleb and Nora sat quietly at the table, the weight of their parents' unspoken fears pressing into them. News crackled from the television, the Hale case continues to stir national debate. Deputy Harris, suspended pending investigation, maintains his innocence. The county board is set to meet again today amidst mounting pressure. Brianna muted the screen. "They're stalling," she said. "Every day they delay, they gamble that the world will look away." Marcus shook his head. "Not this time. Not with the footage everywhere. The more they stall, the more people will ask why." At the courthouse, the air was heavier than usual. Protesters filled the steps, their chants rolling like thunder. Accountability now. No more silence. Signs lifted high in the sunlight, cameras sweeping across the crowd. Inside, the board looked weary, but Councilman Harris Sr. radiated defiance. His son sat beside his attorney, lips pressed into a thin, angry line. Paulson entered moments later, not in uniform but in plain clothes, a quiet signal of separation. He caught Marcus's eye, a subtle nod of solidarity. Testimony resumed. Witnesses from the resort staff described what they saw, Harris dismissing the badge, the cuffs clicking shut. One young housekeeper, voice trembling, admitted, "I wanted to say something, but I was afraid. When I saw the children crying, I knew it was wrong. I'll never forget it." Harris's attorney countered, painting Marcus as aggressive, Brianna as provocative, twisting facts into accusations. But every time the video replayed, the narrative unraveled. The images spoke louder than any defense. During a recess, Marcus stepped into the hallway for air. Harris appeared across the corridor, flanked by his lawyer but unguarded in his expression. Their eyes locked, a flash of contempt sparking between them. Harris muttered just loud enough to carry, "This isn't over. You think cameras make you untouchable? You'll see." Marcus stiffened, every instinct screaming to respond. But Brianna's hand touched his arm, grounding him. Not here. Not his way. That evening, back at the villa, the family tried to decompress. Caleb colored in silence, drawing shapes that looked like badges and broken chains. Nora curled beside Brianna with a storybook but listened more than read. Marcus sat by the patio door, scanning the dark as though the night itself might hold answers. The phone rang. It was Paulson again. His voice was low, urgent. "I wanted to warn you. Harris is under pressure, and his father's pulling strings. They're cornered, and cornered men do reckless things. Be careful, Marcus." Marcus hung up slowly. He turned to Brianna, his face a mask of resolve. "This isn't just about a lawsuit anymore. It's about survival. Ours, and what we stand for." Brianna's eyes hardened. "Then we stand taller." The children watched silently, absorbing the gravity without fully grasping it. The villa felt less like a vacation home and more like a command post. The battle was no longer abstract, it had slipped into their lives like sand through an open door. Outside, the desert stars blinked coldly, indifferent witnesses to human struggle. But inside, the Hales sat close, their unity a fragile but unbreakable shield. Cracks had formed in the system, and also in their armor. But through those cracks, light still passed. By the 12th day, the courthouse steps had become a battlefield of words and signs. Protesters arrived not only from nearby towns but from neighboring states, swelling the crowd into thousands. Some carried drums, others megaphones. The chants thundered, "Justice for the Hales," while counter-protesters, fewer but loud, shouted back about law and order and respecting authority. The tension was visible, audible, alive. Inside the villa, the Hales prepared for another day under the spotlight. Brianna fastened her blazer with hands steadier than her pulse. Marcus adjusted his tie, then paused to kneel before his children. "Today may get loud," he told Caleb and Nora softly. "But no matter what you hear, remember, we are not the ones who should be ashamed." Caleb nodded, lips pressed tight. Nora whispered, "I'm not scared anymore." At the courthouse, the board faced a room charged with heat. Harris sat rigid, his jaw locked, while his father whispered strategy into his ear. Paulson entered quietly, eyes scanning the crowd, his plain clothes marking his distance from the official line. The proceedings dragged, voices clashing like swords. Brianna spoke with the clarity of a practiced blade. When prejudice wears a badge, justice is not served, it is strangled. She played the video again, every frame an indictment. Reporters scribbled, cameras clicked, the crowd outside roared louder. Then the chaos spilled inside. A protester burst through the doors, shouting, "Enough delays. Fire him now." Deputies rushed to restrain him, the chamber erupting in gasps and noise. Harris smirked, as if chaos validated his defense. The judge pounded for order. Brianna stood tall, refusing to let the moment fracture her. "This is not a spectacle," she declared. "It is a demand for accountability. Every delay is another wound to the truth." After adjournment, the Hales stepped outside. The crowd surged forward, a wave of voices lifting them like a banner. Caleb and Nora clung close, their small figures pressed between their parents and the chants. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward, the desert sun burning overhead. And then, shouts from the counter-protesters. Words turned sharper, angrier. One hurled, "Go back where you came from." Another spat toward the steps. The line of deputies tensed, forming a barrier between the two groups. Marcus instinctively pulled his children closer, shielding them with his frame. Brianna's jaw hardened, her voice cutting through the uproar, "We will not be silenced by hate." The crowd erupted again, this time with defiance, drowning out the jeers with chants of unity. That night, the resort was ringed with flashing lights. Patrol cars stood at the gates, not for ceremony but protection. Inside, the villa hummed with unease. Caleb whispered, "Why do they hate us?" Marcus answered quietly, the words like stone, "Because they fear what they don't understand. And fear makes people cruel." Brianna added, her voice softer, "But love makes us stronger than their fear." The children nestled close, their eyelids heavy, but their minds awake with questions no child should carry. Outside, the desert air carried the echo of chants into the night. Fire burned in the distance, not flames of destruction, but the fire of voices rising, demanding, refusing to fade. The Hales sat together, weary but unbroken, their unity the only answer they needed. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying a promise. The storm was far from over, but they were no longer facing it alone. The morning after the protests felt strangely muted. The square, usually alive with voices, lay quiet as if exhaustion had hushed even the loudest hearts. But silence did not mean peace. It was the silence of breath held, of people waiting to see what the system would decide. Inside Villa 12, the Hales moved slowly. The children ate cereal without chatter. Marcus read the paper, though his eyes barely tracked the words. Brianna scrolled through her laptop, her face pale in the glow of the screen. Headlines screamed justice delayed, board to reconvene in closed session, deputies still protected by politics. "They're hiding," Brianna murmured. "Closed session means they'll bury it behind walls." Marcus folded the paper sharply. "Then we bring the walls down." The day unfolded with an unnatural heaviness. No reporters came knocking. The protesters had retreated to rest. Even the deputies stationed at the gates looked weary. The quiet pressed in, forcing the Hales to sit with themselves. Nora curled in Brianna's lap, tracing patterns on her mother's sleeve. "Are we losing?" she whispered. Brianna kissed the crown of her daughter's head. "We only lose if we stop. And we haven't stopped." Caleb, sitting by the window, asked, "Why won't they just say sorry? Wouldn't it all be over then?" Marcus walked to him, crouched low. "Because some people think an apology makes them weak. They'd rather carry lies than admit the truth. That evening, Paulson visited again. His face carried more lines than before, his voice low. The board's under immense pressure. Harris's father is cutting deals, calling in favors. They're trying to shield him. Brianna's eyes narrowed. And what about you? Where do you stand? Paulson sighed. I stand with what's right. But standing alone has a cost. I need you to understand, I may not be able to hold the department together if this splits further. Marcus studied him, the weight of empathy and suspicion mixed in his gaze. Then let it split. Sometimes breaking is the only way to rebuild. Later that night, the villa felt heavy with waiting. Caleb drifted into uneasy dreams. Nora clutched her towel cape again, as if wearing it could make her braver. Marcus sat by the window, staring out at the desert darkness, his silhouette tense. Brianna worked quietly, her pen scratching across paper like a metronome of determination. The silence pressed deeper. It was the kind that felt dangerous, the pause before a storm, the quiet in which enemies planned. Marcus felt it in his bones, the same way he had felt danger before raids and arrests. Something unseen was moving closer. Brianna finally looked up from her notes. They think silence will make us stop talking. But silence can be louder than shouting if we listen to it. Marcus nodded slowly. Then we listen. And when they break it, we'll be ready. The children slept soundly at last, unaware of the storm waiting beyond the silence. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying the weight of promises unkept and justice postponed. Inside, the Hales sat awake longer than they should have, bound not by fear alone but by the determination to endure the silence without surrendering to it. The board's decision came without warning. Mid-morning, reporters flooded the square again, cameras flashing as word spread, closed session concluded. Statement imminent. The Hales arrived together, their steps measured, every movement watched. Caleb and Nora clung to their parents' hands, their small frames shielded by the weight of attention. The crowd hushed as the chairman stepped onto the courthouse steps, paper trembling in his hand. After review, he began, voice flat, Deputy Harris will receive a formal reprimand. He will be reinstated after a brief suspension. Gasps swept through the crowd. Protesters shouted in outrage. Journalists surged forward, microphones thrust like weapons. Brianna's jaw tightened, her grip on Nora's hand like steel. Marcus's fists clenched at his sides, every muscle taut. This is not justice, Brianna said aloud, her voice cutting through the chaos. Cameras turned instantly, her words amplified. This is cowardice dressed as compromise. You punish a man with a slap while teaching children that humiliation has no consequence. The crowd roared in agreement, chants rising again, shame. 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 Harris stepped out behind his father, smugness plastered across his face. For a fleeting moment, his eyes locked on Marcus. A silent message passed, I won. Marcus moved one step forward, but Brianna's hand on his arm pulled him back. Not here. Not his stage, she whispered. Reporters demanded reactions. Brianna faced them squarely. This decision proves what we already knew, systems protect themselves, not the people. But our fight doesn't end here. We will take this beyond this courthouse, beyond this county. Federal courts. Civil rights litigation. We will not be silenced. The protesters erupted into cheers. Some began marching around the square, their chants echoing against the stone buildings. That night, the villa felt heavier than ever. Caleb asked, so, they win? His voice cracked with fear he couldn't hide. Marcus crouched, meeting his son's eyes. No, Caleb. They stalled. That's different. Winning means the truth disappears. And the truth is louder than ever. Nora tugged at Brianna's sleeve. But why don't people just do what's right? Brianna stroked her hair gently. Because doing right takes courage. And not everyone has the courage to face themselves. The villa door rattled suddenly. Marcus froze, instincts sharp. He opened it to find an envelope shoved under the frame. No sender, no return address, only a single sheet inside with bold black letters, "Leave town, or next time, it won't be cuffs." Brianna read it, her face cold and controlled. So this is how they want to play. Marcus folded the letter carefully, his expression unreadable. Then we make sure the world sees this too. They wanted to silence us. Instead, they've given us more to speak about. The children watched silently, sensing the danger even without understanding the threat. The walls around them seemed thinner, cracks forming not just in the system outside but in the fragile sanctuary of home. Yet as the desert wind howled against the glass, the hails held each other tighter. Fear might creep through the cracks, but so did light, and they had no intention of extinguishing it. The storm had broken open, and retreat was no longer possible. The letter spread like wildfire once Brianna released it to the press. Within hours, national networks ran the headline, "Threats against Hale family after resort incident." Commentators debated not only the case but the dangers of retaliation. Advocacy groups amplified their support, while thousands more joined protests across the state. At Villa 12, patrol cars now stood outside day and night. Caleb and Nora played near the window, whispering questions about safety. Marcus stood guard in his own way, checking locks twice, scanning the grounds with a soldier's vigilance. Brianna worked relentlessly, shaping their case into something that could no longer be ignored. The courthouse hearing resumed under a heavier atmosphere. The board sat stiff, but their authority seemed brittle now, cracked by public outrage. Protesters filled the square again, their chants no longer pleading but demanding. Justice now. Protect families. When Brianna addressed the chamber, her words carried the strength of weeks of pain and resistance. You may think you can bury this under bureaucracy, but the world is watching. You may believe threats will scare us silent, but our voices grow louder. We are not fighting for comfort. We are fighting for every family who has been humiliated, silenced, or erased by the abuse of power. Marcus followed, his tone steady but thunderous. I have worn a badge in service of this nation for years. I have seen corruption and I have fought against it. But never did I think my own children would learn, firsthand, that the law is not always just. Today I stand not as an agent, but as a father. And I will not stop until justice is something my children can believe in. The chamber shook with applause, unusual in its solemn walls. Even some deputies stood, torn between loyalty and conscience. Paulson watched silently, his eyes betraying the weight of a man choosing sides at last. The board's final statement was weak, a blur of protocol reviews and further oversight. But by then, it no longer mattered. The Hales had carried their fight beyond those walls. Federal agencies opened investigations. Civil rights groups filed parallel suits. The county's attempt at silence had instead unleashed a chorus. That evening, the family returned to the villa one last time. The children were exhausted, their eyes heavy, but their questions lingered. Caleb asked softly, "Did we win?" Marcus pulled him close. "Winning isn't always a moment, son. Sometimes it's a journey. And we've started it." Nora nestled against Brianna. "Are people still listening?" Brianna kissed her forehead. "Yes, sweetheart. And they'll keep listening, because we won't let them forget." Later, the family stood on the patio together, the desert stars bright above them. The infinity pool reflected their silhouettes, four figures bound not just by blood but by resolve. The bruises had faded, but the memory had not, and neither had the lesson. Marcus looked out across the canyon. "Silence protects injustice," he said softly. "But voices, together, they can move mountains." Brianna reached for his hand. And we'll keep speaking, until the mountains fall. The children clung to them, safe for the moment, their small hearts steadied by the unshakable truth they had endured. The desert wind carried their words away, but it also carried them forward, into headlines, into courts, into history. The fight was not finished. But the hails had transformed pain into power, humiliation into resistance, and silence into something that could never be muted again. The story closed not with defeat, nor even with victory, but with a promise, that justice is never given, it is demanded, carried, and spoken into being, one voice at a time.